Those are all vapes. In some universities in the United States, up to 45% of students claim to have vaped at least once in 2022. Invented as a healthier option for smoking, vaping has vastly outpaced its predecessor for usage. So how does something get so popular? In this video, we go deep into the history of vaping. I talked to my sister who just quit vaping.
I need the nicotine feeling.
And then I'll tell you what you probably didn't know about e-cigarettes.
Don't suck on the fruit-flavored air.
Before we get too deep into that, let's talk about the history of vaping. This is a story best told in 4 parts. Smoking in various forms has been dated all the way back to 5000 BCE. From tobacco to various hallucinogenic drugs, the earliest traces come from early Peruvian and Ecuadorian people. Fast forward to the year 1560, and early smoking was introduced in Europe throughout France and Portugal. It's important to understand that at this point in the world, the European medical practices said that everything had a medicinal benefits, which isn't really true. In the case of smoking, it had a heating and drying effect that was assigned beneficial value by early doctors of that time. Most of the smoking in that time period was more akin to pipes and cigars than it was to what we would now know as cigarettes. Once they found their way to Spain in the mid-1600s, that's when the modern-day cigarette was really invented. Thus ensued a mass popularization of cigarettes, in large part due to cultural influences, but also largely because of the supposed health benefits of smoking. The name cigarette, as I'm sure you can tell, came from France. After France, they spread to England and so on and so forth. The 1900s were a major catalyst in the popularization of cigarettes in North America. In fact, in 1965, it was determined that up to 50% of men in the United States smoked on a daily basis.
What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?
In modern times, it's no secret that the majority of cases of lung cancer come from smoking. But hundreds of years ago, medicine was very different from what it is now. The earliest suspicions of negative health consequences originating from the smoking of cigarettes came back in 1602 from an anonymous English author, claiming that he suspected the smoking of tobacco would have similar negative health effects to those who work in chimneys on a regular basis. Not much of a science, but the theory panned out in the long run. Back in the early 1900s, lung cancer was an incredibly rare disease, leading to little information being known about it. Despite that, in 1912, Isaac Adler theorized that lung cancer may have a link to smoking. It wasn't until the 1920s, when the disease kept getting more and more common, that this became a popular idea. Despite these earliest links of lung cancer and smoking, newspapers refused to publish these articles because cigarette and tobacco companies made up a majority of their advertising revenue. As studies became more and more concrete, the United States Surgeon General published a report in 1964 linking concrete evidence that smoking caused lung cancer. Despite that, smoking was still very, very popular. Meet Han Lik, a Chinese pharmacist turned inventor of the modern-day e-cigarette. He started smoking at the age of 18, but after his father died of lung cancer, he vowed to quit smoking forever. In 2003, he filed patents for the first version of his product in China, the United States, and the European Union. This device looks a lot different than the modern e-cigarettes that we know today, but it definitely made the transition from smoking to vaping much easier. For the longest time, these were only marketed as a way to quit smoking, not as a new way to consume nicotine. Nowadays, however, the majority of young e-cigarette users have never smoked before. Now the devices have evolved over time, getting larger with more attachments before recently shrinking down in size again. And it's only been in the most recent few years that they've become heavily popularized. Throughout the mid-2010s, vaping began to pick up in popularity majorly, mostly because of the customization of the large form vapes that were popular at the time. Although it was still a relatively small market, it was a market that was growing. As that trend began to fade and the size profile of e-cigarettes began to get smaller, they had a much wider appeal. And when Juul began to take over the market quite substantially, the reports of use in teenagers and young adults skyrocketed in 2017 and 2018. This was because Juul used salt-based nicotine, which was up to 20 times stronger and thus more addictive than the nicotine in other e-cigarettes, but it was much smoother for the user, ultimately making it very appealing to users who had never tried it before. Not to mention that Juul has been shown to have marketed to underage users, promoting the uptick in use that came in 2017. Somehow, I've never personally vaped, but a lot of my friends do. It's definitely got a large appeal within my age group. So I want to better understand how marketing was able to impact my generation so much in terms of e-cigarette adoption. Starting back in the early days of tobacco advertising, cigarette companies had it easy. There were no restrictions on what they could say at the time. That is a stark difference to the total ban on cigarette ads nowadays. Back in the 1940s, most cigarette companies were using doctors for their advertising, claiming there to be positive health effects from smoking. Into the 50s and 60s, as the rules became more strict, cigarette companies had to shift towards celebrity endorsements and creating images of luxury from cigarettes. Finally, in the 80s and 90s, tobacco companies made a shift towards flashy, colorful advertisements aimed towards younger people. And this wouldn't be the last nicotine product targeted towards younger people. You see, when e-cigarettes were launched, the target market was very clearly aimed towards people looking to quit smoking. The products wouldn't be appealing to new users anyways, so the focus was really clear. But advancements in the product made it more appealing to non-smokers, especially underage non-smokers. This is largely due to the emotional appeal of the advertisements and online content at the time. Advertisers were using happy emotions, showing images of younger people vaping with friends and having fun, instead of talking about the potential health effects. Not to mention that within the period from 2011 to 2014, e-cigarette ad spend went from just $6.5 million all the way up to over $115 million per year. Around then, content making fun of vaping was fairly common on social media, with creators making the biggest vapes they could and smoking them. It was found that 85% of the e-cigarette content that was being produced on the internet at that time was actually sponsored or advertiser content. And because of the lax rules around influencer content at the time, no one really knew. And then introduced Juul. As we mentioned before, the nicotine content in a Juul product could be up to 20 times stronger than a traditional vape, meaning 20 times more addictive. Add in a massive online marketing budget and that's a recipe for disaster. Juul's marketing primarily used very young actors, and they focused the themes on relaxation, freedom, and sex appeal. Looking at these ads, it becomes very clear why a young person might be interested. Add in that the packaging was colorful and vibrant, and the flavors were sweet and fruity. Yeah, you're kind of targeting kids at that point. When the e-cigarette companies found out who was buying their products, they played into it hard, regardless of the consequences. And those consequences became very expensive. In 2020, Juul Labs was sued by 33 US states, claiming their marketing targeted underage users and downplayed the health risks of their products. Earlier this year, they were ordered to pay $440 million in fines for those mistakes. Advertising and marketing shape our buying decisions, especially with new modern-day influencer marketing. Sponsored content coming from creators we trust gives us a false sense of confidence and leads people to believe the creator wouldn't lead them astray. But that's just not true. And unfortunately, it goes well beyond advertising. Societal pressures also play a massive role, and it's not something that should be downplayed. So I figured I would talk to my sister, who recently quit vaping.
Back in 2019, you got a vape. I remember that.
Yes, we were working and we said, let's get vapes. And then 2 hours later, we were in a vape store. There was absolutely no reason. And a month later, I said, I don't need it. And then I changed my mind.
Why did you change your mind? Like, when did you change your mind and why did you change your mind?
It was kind of just because all of my friends started vaping. And then I was like, well, why don't I'm using it this consistently. Why don't I just get my own, like, rather than just using my friends?
I had the experience. I never actually wanted to buy my own. Because it's expensive. Like, I don't know how expensive it is, but it gets expensive over time, yeah?
It does, yeah.
And then, like, was there a point that you were like, whoa, what the fuck am I spending this? Why am I spending all this money?
When I started vaping, like when I first bought my vape was when like COVID started happening, everything started shutting down. I was like, hey, well, I'm not gonna be able to use my friends anymore. Like, I should just get my own because I know I'm gonna want it, so I might as well get it. And then I was like, oh, I'll stop after the pandemic. Once the pandemic's done, then I'll stop. I don't know. And then one day I just like actually did stop. I just was like, well, if I keep saying that I'm gonna stop, why don't I just do it now? Was
it the nicotine that you were like, oh, I need that? Or like you're getting like side effects from not having it?
I think a lot of my friends, it was like the nicotine that was why they wanted it. But I don't think I ever felt that like I need the nicotine feeling. I don't know. I felt bad for using my friends' things all the time. So if I'm going to be that person, then just commit to it. You know what I mean?
Recently quit, like a few months ago, right?
A few months ago, yeah.
What was the catalyst that you were like, I'm done?
It's actually really funny. I quit my job. At the time, I was working in a restaurant. Everyone around me had a vape. And then I started a new job. There was no vape around, so it was the best opportunity.
Like everyone around you's doing it, so it's just like normal to do it.
Exactly, yeah. Like it forces you to take a deep breath, right? Calm down. I'm more opposed to smoking because my whole life I've been told don't smoke, right? No one ever told me don't suck on the fruit flavored air. No one ever told me that, right? Now looking back, like it was such a waste of money. Granted, vaping is cheaper than smoking, but not by much.
So what should we take away from this? Is vaping a lost cause like smoking was so many years ago? Well, back in 2019, a Facebook post of a teenager suffering from popcorn lung went viral. That was initially linked to vaping and the chemical diacetyl that is found in some vape juices. The name popcorn lung comes from a group of popcorn factory workers who were regularly exposed to this chemical and then developed this disease. But there's a very weak link between popcorn lung and vaping. The majority of vape juices don't even contain diacetyl, and in some countries like the United Kingdom, it's actually against the law to include it in the solution. I don't know about you, but I always thought that popcorn lung was the main risk of vaping. But if it's not that, then what is? According to Johns Hopkins, vaping without a doubt exposes you to fewer toxic chemicals than cigarettes, but that does not mean that they are safe. There are still lung and heart issues that can come from regular e-cigarette use, especially in modified units. And in comparison to smoking, the nicotine content in e-cigarettes is drastically higher than what is found in the tobacco in cigarettes. In fact, one Juul pod contains the equivalent nicotine content of 20 cigarettes. That means that the nicotine addiction in new users can actually be worse than that of cigarette smokers. So at its base, we are all aware that just simply not vaping is definitely safer for you, but with the intensity of nicotine addictions in most young adults now, that just isn't realistic. A lot of regulation in the e-cigarette industry, from production to advertising, has been created in the last few years. The FDA started regulating e-cigarettes in the same way as tobacco products in the United States. Here in Canada, all e-cigarette advertising where there's even a remote chance it could be seen by a minor is strictly forbidden. And in the UK, they have an outright ban on e-cigarette advertising. The moral of the story is that we're learning. The vape was invented to kick cigarette addictions. Now e-cigarettes are more popular than cigarettes ever were. Maybe you could see that as a failure, but e-cigarettes haven't even been around for 20 years and the regulation is already almost on par with smoking. So sure, there's mistakes that were made along the way, but we're making progress. We're trying to make the future better than it was in the past. If you like this video, you'll enjoy this video where I tell you how America got addicted to the Kardashians. And if you enjoyed this one, please do subscribe and like this video down below. I'll see you guys next week.